Whether your team is your family, your business, or your employees, staying connected is crucial. You can depend on the Cross Insurance family.
Very good.
To provide the best insurance solutions for you. We've got your team protected. Visit crossagency.com today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of GlobeDocs, a series of monthly documentary screenings and discussions with filmmakers, as well as an annual film festival that is happening in October. My name is Marcela Garcia, and I am an associate editor and opinion columnist with the Boston Globe. Today, we're hosting a discussion with filmmaker Selena Escher about her film titled Fly So Far. Selena is a Swiss Salvadoran director, and her film is incredibly timely and compelling. Fly So Far follows Teodora Vasquez, a woman who in 2008 was sentenced to 30 years in a Salvadoran prison after suffering a stillbirth at 9 months pregnant. At the Ilopango Women's Prison, Teodora became a spokesperson for the 17, a group of working class women who were unjustly incarcerated after experiencing obstetric complications. While it exposes brutal human rights abuses, Fly So Far is unmistakably a story of collective resistance, activism, and sisterhood, as well as the self-determination and agency of women. Like I said in the beginning, I cannot think of a more relevant film to talk about right now and for us Americans to watch, as states here in the US enact abortion bans and introduce regressive legislation meant to regulate reproduction. In this context, Fly So Far serves as a grave warning of just how far government control of women's bodies can go. Before we begin, let me tell you how the next 45 minutes or so are going to go. We're going to chat for about 30 minutes, and then we'll take questions from all of you. So make sure you submit them via the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to put your questions in there at any time. Lastly, a reminder that this is a virtual event and will be recorded and distributed post-event. So let's jump right in. Hi, Selena, and welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you very much.
So I wanted to begin, if I may. First of all, let me tell you that even though I knew the status quo in El Salvador, I knew how the criminalization of abortion is just so harsh over there. I was crying in your documentary so hard, and I was just so moved by the plight of these women. And so I wanted to begin, if I may, with the somewhat obvious. What drew you to this painful and unjust topic of the criminalization of abortion in El Salvador? And feel free to share with us a little bit of your personal history as you tell us about the genesis of this film.
Well, first, I'm a Salvadorian, I'm a feminist, and I'm a filmmaker, and I'm now also an activist. So when I started this film, first, when I heard about the stories about the 17, there are women are unjustly imprisoned for having a miscarriage. I heard this news, and the first thing what happened, I was really angry. I was enraged, like, how is this happening? How is this possible? This injustice that is happening. So then I decided to go to El Salvador and meet the women and tell their stories. So at the beginning, I contacted the citizen group for the decriminalization for abortion. This is a feminist organization who are working with the 17 with human rights lawyers. And so through this organization, I had access to go to the Ilopango prison. This was October 2017, and it was the first time I met Teodora Vasquez and the 17. And when I entered the prison and I met Teodora, first, all this anger that I had transformed into something else, into great admiration to Teodora and how she supports the other women, how the sisterhood they have inside the prison, And so that was the beginning. And then I talked to Teodora about and the 17th to the idea of making a film to denounce these human rights violations that are happening, and also that the world has to know what's happening in El Salvador. So they agreed to make this film, and from the beginning, the idea was to contribute to the struggle to release the 17, and also to contribute to the struggle for the decriminalization of abortion in El Salvador. So there has been a big feminist movement in El Salvador who wants to decriminalize abortion. And so the idea was that this film is also part of this movement and so it can contribute to the struggle that is already happening in El Salvador. So this was the beginning. And then a 6-year journey happened. And then, well, as you can see in the film, we went the whole process. We documented the process of Teodora, and yes, so that was also for me important to portray what happened to them, but also not that they are victims. That I don't want to re-victimize them. So for me, it was really important to show how strong they are, the sisterhood, and how important it is, to support each other and to speak up.
I want to ask you, or follow up on something that you said about the impact of this film and what, if any, tangible sort of impact you can see. But before we go there, I kind of wanted you to explain to our audience a little bit, what is the origin of this total ban on abortions in El Salvador? I think in the film, we learned that it is rooted in the Constitution. Can you explain how that came to be? Has abortion always been a crime in El Salvador?
Well, before 1998, abortion was allowed in 3 circumstances. But then in 1998, the 2 major changes happened. The first one was Article 1 in the Constitution. They added the word conception. So it says in the Salvadoran Constitution says, life begins at conception. So from this, we can see there is no, like the word conception, it's not a scientific word, but it's in the Constitution. So we can see it's an evidence there is no separation between state and church. And then secondly, the other thing that happened in the penal code, they criminalize abortion in all circumstances. So if the woman has an abortion, she can get from 2 to 8 years in prison. And the doctors, if they proceed the abortion, they can't get till 6 years of prison. But the thing is, what happened is when women who have, for example, a miscarriage, and they go to the public hospitals and they seek for help, for medical help, in the hospitals, the women get criminalized. At first, the doctors call the police, and then the police arrives to the hospitals. They handcuff the women to the beds of the hospitals. Some of the women have been handcuffed around 1 week in the hospitals. They are guarded by police. They are treated horribly, and that in this situation, so in a situation of vulnerable, they start interrogation and they start to criminalize them. And then in the trials, because the women don't have enough money to pay a lawyer, in the trials, the judges change the typification of the crime from abortion to aggravated homicide. And this is why they get 30 or 40 years. And now 50 years of prison. This is what happened with the last case, 50 years of prison for having a miscarriage. So we see the system, it's a really corrupt judicial system that criminalizes women for being women, and especially women who live in poverty. So this is also a criminalization of poverty.
Right. To that point, I mean, we all know this fact intellectually, but I think you clearly show it in your documentary, the notion that the criminalization of abortion disproportionately punishes poor women. I mean, Teodora says it in the film, there are no wealthy women in prison. We are the most vulnerable, she says. We have no rights. We are guilty of being women. From the moment we get pregnant, our own life does not count. Those are her words. So connect El Salvador's total abortion ban and what you expose in the film to the status quo right now here in the US. What should people take away from your film? I mean, is this sort of a preview of what's to come?
Well, yes, we have been saying this all along with the criminalization of abortion. It means that women are criminalized even if they have a miscarriage or a stillbirth. And also what happens in El Salvador is that because of this law, the moment a woman gets pregnant, actually the fetus has more rights than the woman. So this means that women lose all of the bodily autonomy and the rights to be just to live as a human being, because it means that they have to give birth although they die in the process. So it means that also by the law, if women are like second-class citizens, and I mean, this doesn't happen to any man who needs a medical procedure. He goes to the hospital and he will get any, access to health. But how is this possible? They are denying women to have access to health. There's other examples, a lot of consequences of the criminalization of abortion. For example, also women who, for example, they have cancer and they are pregnant. In El Salvador, the doctors deny a procedure that can help the women to survive, but it will cause her a miscarriage. So they let the women die. So this is what's happening. And also, if a girl who was 10 years old and she was raped, and the state denies the young girls to have an abortion, which means women, girls and women are forced to keep the pregnancy. So there is a committee against torture. It says that if a girl is forced to keep a pregnancy caused by rape, this is torture. So we are saying that the state is forcing young girls, actually it's torture against girls. I mean, how is it possible a girl who's 10 years old, why she should be like have a kid? This has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do. It's just to control women's bodies. And
to your point, that already happened here. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to remind our viewers that this just happened last week when a 10-year-old girl was raped in Ohio and had to go out of state to get an abortion. It's already happening is what I'm trying to say.
No, exactly. It's already happening. And I mean, it's just to criminalize women's bodies, and they just take away our rights. And this is, we see what's happening when people who are in power, who are fundamentalist, extreme, right-wing, this is what they are doing. So it's, I mean, I think this should be a wake-up call for everybody. And I think this is goes beyond borders, because the patriarchal system is oppressing women and people who can get pregnant everywhere. So I mean, we can see all the injustice that is happening, and it's a war on our bodies.
To me, one of the most forceful things that Teodora says in your film is, and I'm going to quote in Spanish, El Salvador se está adueñando de las mujeres. Basically, women are becoming the possession of the state of El Salvador. And this she says, when she is describing the moment she realized that there were other women in the prison like her. And so she had this epiphany, and she gets very angry, which ultimately leads to her activism and involvement, right? So talk about that resistance, right? The activism against the abortion ban in El Salvador, the advocates. Do you see this grassroots pro-abortion rights social movement there having an impact or moving the needle? Like the green wave that we saw in Argentina, in Mexico, and Colombia recently, where they changed, laws. And a big part of this change had to do with this Marea Verde.
Well, yes, in that moment, Teodora, she realized this is not something just only happened to her. It's something systematically that happens to all women, and especially to women who live in poverty. So we see that it's something it's systematically. It's not just a random one person, no? And then there is a big feminist organizations, resistance there is in El Salvador from many generations. There are women that are now young women and older women also who are organizing themselves. And they tried to legalize abortion in 4 cases in 2016, and it was not possible because there was not there didn't have the majority in the parliament. So this was the left-wing government tried to legalize abortion in 4 cases. It was not possible. Then 3 years later, they tried to legalize abortion in 3 cases. and but then the situation changed a little bit because now we're living in a fascist dictatorship. So it's really, really difficult now, because now the parliament is all full also from really extreme right-wing, controlled from the extreme right-wing party. So now we're living in a situation where there is persecution, because before were persecution against women, but now it's a persecution against feminists, persecution against activists. There's a persecution against human rights defenders and journalists. So there's no freedom of speech. So now it's the situation became worse in the last 2 years. And so, but the feminist movement is still fighting, is still there, and yeah, they are resisting. There are many organizations, but as we can see, it will be like, it's almost impossible if the extreme right wing has the total power of the parliament. They are deciding new laws, they're deciding the re-election of the president. They are also making a new constitution, whatever he chooses to. So it's a really, really difficult situation. So now what is really important is solidarity and then international sisterhood. I think that's the solution.
Yeah. So to be clear, this is the majority in parliament is the party of the president, right? President Nayib Bukele, who, you know, despite being super young, and he's millennial, I mean, not super young, but he's a millennial sort of, you know, type of dictator, if you will, or authoritarian, I think, like you were saying. This is his party, right? And so he's part of the opposition. He obviously supports the abortion ban, right?
Yes, he said many times he will keep abortion strict. Before he became president, he said he was for one cause, if the life of the woman is in danger. But you know, they say anything before they get elected. And now he really has shown his true face and has shown that he doesn't care about women, about women's rights, and so there's a persecution against everybody who thinks differently, everybody who says, hey, you're doing something against the constitution. Also, he's tried to, you know, shut up everybody. So now it's a really difficult situation, because there's no real opposition now. He has control of all the powers. So I mean, now
there's no political opposition per se for him. Yeah. I mean, it struck me as very disingenuous, for at least in 2 instances in your film. I think it was the legislature and the priest or somebody from the church who dismissed these cases of Teodora as like a very small percentage, to the point that they don't count. I think it was the priest or somebody from the church who said that it's just statistically it's not relevant. And I felt like yelling and screaming at the screen and say, even if it's just one case, even if it's statistically insignificant, whatever that means, it's one too many. And how can they be so dismissive? And I guess it tells you, or speaks to the power of the state there. And like you said, the fact that there's no political opposition, right? That's how they dismiss it. So another thing that I think this is what the film, you know, the thing that gives me hope about the film is Teodora's resilience and her strength. It's really inspiring, and it really comes across, you know, through all the sadness and anger, right? I mean, at some point she says something that stayed with me, la cárcel uno lo vive en la mente también, or there is a prison of the mind as well. She says, if I keep thinking that I'm imprisoned, I will never be free. My present is my freedom. Talk about her transformation into a leader, you know, and can you tell us where is Teodora now?
Well, she became a leader. I mean, even before I met her, like she was the first 5 years she was in prison. She didn't know about the other women, but then this organization, the Citizen Group for the Decriminalization of Abortion, they made this research and found at the beginning there were 17 cases. This is why they're called the 17. And then they met all together, so they knew, okay, there's other women who are experiencing the same. And then the organization said that, okay, they need a spokesperson. So it's easy about the communication if they need something inside the prison. And so all the women then voted, and they decided that Teodora will be the spokesperson. Then she became the spokesperson, and she was their spokesperson for around 5-6 years while she was still in prison. And then she regained her freedom. After she regained her freedom, she started this organization called Mujeres Libres. And this organization is for supporting each other when they are released. So she already knew, she experienced also what happens and what they needed when they are outside prison. So this is why then she made this organization with other women for the 17 and by the 17. So the idea is that to support each other, to find first safe housing, keep studying, and also finding jobs. Because the thing is, what happened is the women, when they got released, they reduced the sentence to 1/3. So when they get 30 years of prison, maybe their sentence is then reduced to 10 years. Some women have been in 15 years in prison, but in front of the system, they are still guilty. It means that for them, they have a criminal record, they cannot find jobs after that. So this was really important to find this organization to keep, to make their life projects, to keep them doing, because the state has taken away their freedom and 10 or 15 years from them. So it was really important from the beginning to show the process of empowerment, because I didn't want to portray them as victims. I wanted to show how strong they are, although they lived all this terrible injustice, how strong, and now how Teodora became an activist. This was really important, because I think this gives us so much hope. This gives so much also strength, and I mean, I admire so much Teodora and how she supports the other women who are now outside prison. So I think that is also the message I want to give: the resilience and the sisterhood. That is also a way to give us, hope and energy to keep fighting.
It really comes across. I mean, that message really becomes alive. I mean, when she goes to visit, her fellow, the women who stay there. Do you have any data on what is, the number of women who remain in prison for in El Salvador for suffering an abortion?
Yes. Well, there are around 190 cases from women who have been criminalized for having an obstetric emergency since 98 till now. Wow. And when we finished the film, there were 24 women still inside prison. And since then, many women have regained their freedom, but this is just thanks to the organizations who have been supporting, and also international organizations like Amnesty International. So this is a struggle that has been happening all these years. Yeah. And from the beginning of this year, there were 4 women who are still inside prison. So you can see from 24 women when we finished the film to 4 women. But a month ago, another woman was criminalized. And she was, she's 19 years old, and she was sentenced to 50 years of prison. For
God, 19 years old?
Yes.
So is that, I mean, following up on one of your first answers, have you been able to quantify in any way, using any metric or measure, the impact of your film? I mean, it sounds like there's a couple of steps forward there and then another step back, but can you tell us a little bit of what you think has been the impact of your film, in moving the needle over there? Because again, there is this sense of hopelessness when you're watching the film, but then you see the women rallying and how they rely upon each other. I mean, even the scenes of Teodora and her family are also so moving, the mom, and so it gives you a little bit of hope, right? But has your film actually had any, I mean, I'm sure in raising awareness all over the world, it certainly, I'm sure it has, but like in El Salvador and kind of moving the needle, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, for now, I feel like we have shown the film more like internationally. It has been, I think the impact that we created, has been more internationally, and finding more organizations or more support or more allies outside El Salvador. Now in El Salvador, it's a bit difficult because of the current situation, but we want to show the film in the whole country. We want to show the film in the countryside and in the city, but we are still planning all this. So because of the situation that it's happening now, it has been really challenging. But we think, it's really now important to make this step to show it in El Salvador. We have shown in a small film festival, but I think we have to show it all in the whole country. So this is still a project that is going on.
Oh, cool. That's good to know. So I think that's the perfect segue into our Q&A segment. There's a couple of questions now here that I'm going to condense. So JM, well, first, JM has this question, and I think we've already addressed it a little bit, but this is a question. Do you believe this will be the trajectory in the US now? Will doctors feel they have to lie to deflect liability? Will we be convicted for miscarriages and stillborn situations as well as actual abortions? I think, you addressed it a little bit, if you have anything to add to that. And then there's, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the criminalization of abortion leads to criminalization of also obstetric emergency, that it's a miscarriage or a stillbirth. I think it can happen. And we have been seeing this also if you're a victim of rape. I mean, it's really terrible what's happening also in the United States. This is like a warning to say this is what happens when fundamentalists are in power and decide over our bodies and take away our rights. So I think this is the way that it's going in the United States. So I think,
Another question from Evelyn Barahona. What can the Salvadoran diaspora do to support the women in El Salvador? Are there organizations we can support either here or in El Salvador? You mentioned some of them, but if you can tell us other organizations, whether again, they're US based or, in El Salvador, I think people would be interested in getting involved.
Well, there is organizations in El Salvador, as I said, the Citizen Group for the Decriminalization of Abortion. In Spanish is Agrupación Ciudadana por la Despenalización del Aborto. And so you can, first, maybe it's important to organize yourself in the States as the diaspora, and then try also to spread the message so people know what's happening. And then also you can support the women who are in El Salvador through this organization or the organization that Teodora founded, Mujeres Libres. So I think this is a good way to support, and just that people know what's happening in El Salvador. And, I think that's a beginning.
Yeah. Another question. How is the US prepared to deal with the incoming overflow of unwanted children and orphans, given it's already, well-known reality, of the foster system in this country, that it's kind of like failing, right? Like, how do you see that playing in El Salvador versus how do you think it's going to play out here? That, and I wouldn't call it unwanted children, but ultimately you're going to have, women are going to be forced to, to give birth to children who, they're not prepared to care for, and perhaps the system is not even prepared to care for.
I mean, if to have a child, this is the biggest decision. Just if you're not wanted, that's really difficult, because that woman, it's traumatized, the kid will be traumatized. I think it's really difficult.
Yeah.
Because everybody should be, the situation is about bodily autonomy, to decide what's happening in your body, and to have a child. This is such a big responsibility. The whole world changes. So, it should only happen when you really want to decide. You have the economic means, you have, like everything that is needed, So this new child that comes to life, it's really difficult, and I don't know really how the system also works in the United States. So
yeah. So one person asked about the men's accountability, right? Is there a movement, or do you see men participating in in the resistance or in pro abortion rights movements there? Because again, the role of men, we don't typically talk about that a lot, but I think it's important. Do you see that? Do you see men getting involved in this fight in El Salvador?
I mean, there's some few men, but mostly are women who are fighting for the right to choose. And I think it will be amazing, or I think it's important if men were more involved in this fight. But I think it's how I see it in El Salvador is a really conservative society, really fundamentalistic and misogyny and sexist, and also women and girls get raped every day and there's no justice. So I mean, I think
that's actually a really good point to make, that El Salvador is one of the worst places for women in terms of domestic violence, in terms of feminicides and just this generalized with violence against women, and so on top of this you have this criminalization of what really is a healthcare procedure, and so you have all the elements, right, to have vulnerable women just basically punished by the government. And so I think this is why it's just so horrible. I mean, there are other countries in the world where abortion is banned completely, but again, in El Salvador, you have all these elements that sort of conspire to make it a horrible formula for women who are poor, who are, who don't typically have access to healthcare. Because again, going back to what Teodora said, there are no wealthy women in prison. Selena, is there like a network in El Salvador of doctors who, do procedures if you have money? I mean, I'm sure there is.
I mean, there are private clinics that you can, it's like around $3,000, but if you have a miscarriage, the doctors will not call the police. But if you go to a public hospital, then the doctors call the police. So it has to do with how much money you have.
So $3,000 is that procedure, typically.
I mean, yeah, it's just if you have a miscarriage and then you go to a private clinic, then you will get the care that you need.
Yeah.
But I mean, about to having an abortion in El Salvador, it's just clandestine. It's so many women die because unsafe abortions. And so that's the cost. It's their life that is actually at stake.
Yeah.
And so saying it that in El Salvador happens this constant violence against women, but then now you have state violence against women. So it's this systematically state violence that it's happening.
So I have one last question for you, or and if there's also anything that you want to add before we wrap up, but what was your biggest challenge making this film? Is there anything that you would do differently, when making this film?
Well, it was a big challenge to film inside the prison. Each time I only had 2 hours time when I visit. So each visit was only 2 hours. So in that moment, in that small time period, I could interview the women and talk to them and make some images, but it was really short moment of time. So this is why I had to go many times to the Ilopango prison. At the end, there's 5 women's prison in El Salvador. So I went to 3 different women's prison and I saw the conditions they are living in. And it's inhumane. This is not a way to live. And there's overcrowded, there's no access to water, no access to healthcare. It's such a really terrible situation. And I just, maybe I just want to show more. Now I think I would like to show more about the conditions of the prison so people can see what they have to survive, how they're experiencing that, because they had no time to grieve. They have been criminalized, and on top they have been treated so horribly inside the prison from the inmates, from the guards. And so it's it is just horrible. It's just, one punishment after the other. So
Yeah.
I think that I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I lied. There's one last question from a member of the audience. Edwin Argueta asks, what advice could you give to those of us trying to demonstrate a different reality of what is happening in El Salvador, particularly when having a conversation about issues like this with members of the Salvadoran diaspora who blindly believe in the Bukele government? And I have to say, there are a lot of Bukele loyalists or people who support him. And Edwin asks, is similar to, to the Trump dynamic here, that, you have these people who blindly believe in a person. And, how would you confront that? What advice do you have for people like Edwin?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to talk about the facts, talk about the news that are happening, how he has these last 2 years has been treated the Salvadorian people. I mean, in this last 3-4 months, they have been arrested around 45,000 people who are being unjustly arrested in this state of exception. So it means this is a dictatorship, a modern dictatorship that people have voted. So I think that is really important to say the facts and how many people are unjustly in prison and what's happening to them. And also they have been killed inside the prison. So, I mean, what is happening? I mean, I think that is really important, that we know that this is a fascist way to govern. I mean, this is not a way to treat the people, and there is no justice, because under the state of exception, people they don't have even the right to have a lawyer. And most of the people who have been arrested are people who live in poverty. So it's again a criminalization of poverty without having the right to speak up and to have a lawyer. And at the same time, there has been censorship. So I think it's important to talk about the facts, organize yourself, and spread, I mean, more the message and give news to the people. So maybe that will help to take away the blindness of the eyes.
Do you think it'll be hard for you? I mean, you mentioned that you're currently working on showing the film in El Salvador. Have you found obstacles? Do you think the government will oppose you showing the film there? Have you gotten any barriers yet?
No, I think
Good.
Now we have been fine.
Good. All right. Well, Selena, thank you so much. If is there anything that you would like to add? That we didn't talk about, anything important about the film that we might have missed?
Well, I just wanted to say at the end of the film, we dedicated the film to Manuela and Beatriz. Yeah. And they are both women who have died in the last years. And the case of Manuela has been in front of the Inter-American Court last year. And I will just tell shortly the story of Manuela. Yep. She also was a woman who lived in the countryside. She had cancer, and then she suffered a miscarriage because of the cancer. When she was in the hospital, they started to criminalize her. And at the end, they gave her 30 years of prison for aggravated homicide. They didn't care that she was ill, that she had cancer, and then she died in prison because of the cancer. She left 2 sons behind, and after 10 years of fighting, her case was accepted in the Inter-American Court. And last year in November, the Inter-American Court said, yes, El Salvador is guilty for all human rights violations committed against Manuela. So has been justice, but the Inter-American Court also said that El Salvador has to change the abortion laws and have to give access to healthcare to the women. Since then, nothing has happened. So we hope also that the case of Manuela could open up for the cases for the other women that are seeking justice, but also to change the abortion law. So we hope also for international solidarity and support so this can happen.
Selena, thank you so much for being here with us today. But most importantly, thank you for making this film. It's very, very powerful. I'm sure we all will carry it, with us for a long time. I appreciate you being here with us. Thank you for sharing your insights. And thank you for being here. To all members of the audience, thanks to our sponsor, Cross Insurance. And just a quick reminder that the recording of this event will go out later to everyone who registered. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.